So you talked about how you interacted with right-wing GamerGate, and you started following some of those people, and you ended up
I
regretting it
did
in some cases, at least, maybe
so
many
many.
cases. So,
Yeah.
do you want to talk about that?
0 out of 10.
We don't. I
Do
haven't
not
actually.
recommend.
Yeah, I haven't actually explored in this series yet the difference between the left-wing GamerGate people and the right-wing GamerGate people. So maybe you can help
So
elaborate on some of that.
so this was my argument. I have always been extremely left wing. I got more left wing after Gamergate, and which would surprise a lot of people because they saw me during my anti like we say anti woke or anti SJW phase, but certainly like right after it was a little bit of a rubber band where I was like very, very, very skeptical of anybody using social justice issues. I would be like, what's your what's your secret? What are you actually planning and doing? Like, are you for real? Like, I'm very, very skeptical. I was just, like I said, rubber band, rebound kind of effect. But I got far more left wing. And I think also like I got more into the kind of like cancel people kind of thing, which like I'm an anti-harassment. I don't believe in calling workplaces and trying to get people fired. Even if you're Nazi, like okay, but unless you do something like the January 6th insurrection, in which case you should be arrested, absolutely 100%. If you're just like I so one of the things I didn't have many, but I had a few who I was just sort of like, we should keep an eye on them at minimum. So like with the Charlottesville march, I had a few then, but I got more leading up to when? No, I think it was probably just about the start of when I started being like, all right, I'm gonna remove a few of you. Um, but yeah, like they would be like, no, he said there were good people on both sides. And I'm like, there's no good people who march with Nazis saying Jews will not replace us. That's not a good person. No matter what is going on, you step out of line and say, hey, I'm not down with that. Like, we had to all do that in Gamergate. We had to say, like, no, I'm not okay with harassment. I am not okay with murder. I am not okay with rape. I am not okay with, like, bomb threats and things, like, which, again, like, anti Gamergate was doing the bomb threats. We assume. But again, this is a assumed thing. Like, you can't prove on the internet who is doing what as easily. Now, the FBI, to a large degree, did have to investigate Gamergate because both Gamergate people and anti-Gamergate people were submitting FBI like reports, including me. I submitted reports to the FBI because I got some. I purposely would talk to some very very antagonistic people who would say horrible things, and I would say, "This is what was said to me. This is what they said to others. Send off the report." Um, and FBI showed that we actually had less than 1%, which generally speaking, you always have 1% of
Well,
criminals
no, hang
in
on.
any.
The less than 1% harassment figure comes from the Women Action Media study, unless there's a different
Yeah,
report that.
there was one specifically from the FBI.
Okay, if you want to send me that, I'd like to see it. That'd be great. But
Let me see if I can pull it up. I'll have to pull it up after stream because I also have to, like I said, I
it's
do
it's
not have my computer
it's
set up.
interesting you mentioned the yeah no it's up to you now, but
I
it's
did
interesting
not,
you mentioned
I didn't
the
even know that the women in media study actually showed the less than 1% though.
yeah there's
Although
also
I wonder
there's
if they also were citing the FBI report.
if you want to argue about no it was a different study they conducted looking at the
Interesting.
Gamergate auto blocker list. There's actually another study too by Newsweek/Brandwatch that found that only 1.26% of people involved or of tweets, it was either people involved or tweets, had contained negative sentiment towards like Brianna Wu and people like that.
That I knew.
But
Yes.
that study, we don't have the full methodology of it. We only because they never
Right.
released it publicly. They only released the
Exactly.
highlights. Yeah.
Yeah.
Which I mean, like that, both studies I think are pretty exculpatory for game. What is that the right word? Exculpatory
Yes, it is.
of GamerGate. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Cool. Okay. Now you mentioned that the Charlottesville thing though. That's interesting because
Yeah.
um that's actually about when I decided that Kotaku in Action was like, oh, Kotaku in Action's got a problem. It seemed like Kotaku in Action. My perception was that after all these other subreddits got banned, large
Yeah.
numbers of people who got banned from those communities on Reddit went to Kotaku in Action because they were one of the few free speech places and willing to defend
That
free speech on Reddit.
makes sense.
And
Now,
it
I don't
became
use Reddit. Yeah.
oh yeah, it became way more right wing. One of the
Yeah.
posts that took me on my war against Kotaku in Action at the time was a poster that said, "I don't care if it was something like I don't remember the exact words, but it was something like, um, I don't care if the social justice warriors get killed or something," and it got like 60
Yeah.
upvotes, and I'm like, holy fuck, like this is insane. Now to be
Yeah.
clear, like there were a couple people, several people, including myself, who disagreed with that poster very publicly and were like, "Whoa, what the fuck is this crazy shit, dude?" And we got like I think I got like 300 upvotes by saying that in response to him. But the
Yeah.
fact that this got any upvotes at all, that
Yeah.
many especially, I think is indicative of a problem. And I started to see
Yes.
more stuff like that on Kotaku in Action in the coming, year. Over like the next year, it just got
Yeah.
worse and worse and worse.
Yes.
And so I had to make like a bunch of videos criticizing, and I left them publicly. And I criticized them in several videos. And I was at war with the moderators too, because I'm like, the mods got to do something about this,
Yeah.
and they never did. And now their
Well,
community is
they
basically
already
dead.
had gone through like their whole. They went through a moderation like mini war back in I don't know. It was like when Johnny Fox was still around,
Oh, there were
and there was a
several
whole big thing of
wars.
like, yeah. To be fair, yeah, yeah. Like I'm actually like, oh man, Kotaku in Action still exists. Like I literally didn't know. Um,
Yeah, it still
I
exists, and it seems I post there about this story because I want to talk to everybody on both sides. But I was up front and I told
yeah,
them right in the beginning, like, hey, look, I very publicly disagreed with your community and left your community publicly. And I told them that at the very
mhm,
start because I wanted to be upfront about that.
yeah,
But yeah, I don't have like a super high opinion of Kotaku in Action. I used to. I think Kotaku in
yeah.
Action was great right up until like 2017. Things started to go off the rails.
Yeah, that's about when it yeah, that's about when it really started getting more extremist and right wing. And this was one of the problems I kept trying to warn journalists. When you constantly say something is let's say a safe haven for certain ideals of like misogyny, racism, you will eventually find all those people who want to do that. And so you had the two sides. You had like the anti-Gamergate, who you would have like the people who are just purposely saying Gamergate is bad and I decry them because they're covering up their own issues, kind of like homophobes covering up for the fact that they're gay and can't handle their gay panic. And then you have the problem where you get the people who are actually looking for a place to be stormtroopers slowly getting in, and they will spread and they will take it over. And there's like back in 2014, 2015, we could still really hold the line, if you will, and it was certainly much more left wing because like I said, Aaron was left wing. He was an SJW. Most of the people who, like for instance, I knew a lot of Boston Gamer Gate people because we were doing a meetup for that and everything. So they were also very kind of left wing, and they were people who either knew Aaron personally or met him personally, all this kind of thing. So you had far more left wingers in that. But because Breitbart and people like Milo were able to like look at this and say, aha, this is an opportunity. We can take advantage of this absolutely. And they're much better at looking at the long-term gain when it comes to culture war issues. In general, I will say like the Democratic Party at least is terrible at like noticing that kind of thing and doesn't want to deal with it because I will say also, like, the Democratic Party is so much to the right of me that it's like very hard for me to like give them a lot of credit sometimes for like doing enough left wing things. But they don't really push back against like the Rush Limbaugh kind of things. They never set up their own left wing infrastructure of truth and actually reality. And so they just leave it to people on the ground like Occupy Wall Street and stuff. And then when Occupy Wall Street happens, you have the Obama reaction of nah, we ain't gonna do that. We're not having it. And you have like even the Daily Show was like, look at how ridiculous these people are. They're basically trying to be communists and talk about like confiscating personal things, even though like in the own interview of Occupy Wall Street on the Daily Show, all of them were like, no, we're not about confiscating things. Material goods are still personal goods. We're not saying you can't have material items or that everything should be nationalized. What we're saying is the giant gap of wealth in discrepancy here is obscene. Teal Deer, yeah, right wingers. So Breitbart, especially because Andrew Breitbart personally said all culture flows downwind, and so they noticed this opportunity. And I think some people who probably were just like in the middle, like Ethan Ralph voted for Obama twice, then he voted for Trump twice. I don't think that's a common thing, but I can say at least one person did it. That's fucking weird. And I think they kind of were able to really notice the people who would be susceptible. And I also think that's why they like got so hardcore on the culture war that they have now, because they also got kind of tricked by their own like propaganda. So like Nick Fuentes and company, like Nick Fuentes obviously is not a gamer. Neither was Ethan Ralph. But they also noticed, the sort of like anti authoritarian, and that has a conjunction with Trump and the QAnon. Like, I ended up adding some QAnon people for a bit because I was like, the fuck are you talking about? Because they would try and like link it to Gamergate and like do those weird kind of puzzle things of like this
I think I know who you're
popular
talking about.
person
There was,
here.
yeah, I think I know who you're talking about.
Oh my god.
There
Oh,
was a
this is such
specific
a
person who was like way bought in. He was a GG guy who was way bought into the
yes.
QAnon stuff later
He,
on.
I will say it wasn't one person, but
Well,
yeah,
there were probably more than one. This was a huge thing.
yeah, yeah.
Well, so then
Broke my
someone
brain.
who's critical of Gamergate will say like, look, this is like the alt-right pipeline that you have these people, they get
Yes.
pissed off about video games, they get pissed off about the social justice warriors trying to take away their big-tittied anime girls, and then now these people are going to eventually end up becoming like QAnon conspiracy theorists or like Ethan Ralph and like go down whatever weird rabbit hole he's gone into these days. And they become like crazy people. What do you say to that?
Okay, yeah, so I do know a few journalists who even back in 2014 and 2015 were telling my dad this when he tried to explain to them that Gamergate is in fact more liberal than not, and that they are tempting danger by not understanding the truth on it. And yeah. So I don't agree, obviously, that it's a gateway. I will say again, it's more that the right wingers noticed the opportunity and seized it. They do this with everything. Democratic U.S. party also tends to like ignore certain opportunities. Now, you also had like Sargon of Akkad, who went with like some weird right wing libertarian party in the UK, and God, that was a thing. It feels like a fever dream that we all just sort of like collectively hallucinated. Anyway, and this happened broadly. Now, what happens is also because you have globally. So I said feminism is anti-Gamergate. This is where it all kind of like merges. Um, in Spain, for instance, the feminist political parties are also extremely anti-Gamergate because they all follow the same sort of political reporters. And those reporters just used the typical sources and copied each other and referenced each other. It was also like 9 years ago, people were only just beginning to use Twitter for news, and they hadn't quite developed the extreme fluidity, I would say, before, Elon Musk turned it into X, and God only knows what the hell's going on with that now. But when it was still sort of in the infancy and they didn't even like copy Reddit pages word for word, which is still a thing that like blows my mind that journalists are doing now. Anyway, so back then they didn't know how to really use Twitter as much as they do now, or as much as they did even like 5 years ago. So when they would look at Twitter and hashtags and things, they would usually just look at other journalists because journalists have to cite their sources, correct? Well, instead of saying their own sources, they would cite other journalists and then just sort of like pass the blame. So it was like, well, I'm not the one saying, sources, it's X saying their sources. And it was like the same thing with the Wikipedia articles. So the Wikipedia articles would only use certain websites and sources, and they had to be like recognized, and they wouldn't accept like some rando website, specifically created by random gamers who are kind of ridiculous and more used to making, video game guides and walkthroughs and really intense walkthroughs because we're going to try and get every single Easter egg, So they wouldn't cite that. And so by that time, like most journalists knew you were walking on thin ice if you used Wikipedia. But if you just used the links in Wikipedia, aha. So that was kind of where that all happened. And again, with the left wing in general, because this has been going on since I don't know how long, but certainly before I was born and way before Gamergate, the left wing would generally just be like, but we're feminist. Obviously, we care about women's issues, of course. And therefore, if a feminist is saying something is not feminist, why would we doubt that?
All right. Well, hey,
So,
I wanted to clarify on something. Sorry, you want to finish your point? Sorry, and then we'll move on to
so,
the next. So there's a so we're
so
I don't want to go super late. And
yeah, yeah.
I still have like 5 follow-up questions I want to ask about other things you've
Okay.
said previously, and then we have like another 30
Yes.
questions to go through on the list of questions. So
Yeah, like I said,
I need
I
to do a
can
better
go
job
on.
controlling the interviews, which I think I'm
I'm
generally
very
good at
difficult when it comes to
if it's
yeah,
oppositional, but if it's sort of like more a story, it's difficult to
yeah,
find good spots to jump in, you know?
understandably.
Yeah. But
And I'm bad at like
I can learn to
story.
get better at that though, as over time, I'm sure. Anyway, to
Practice.
clarify earlier, I meant that Gamergate was a huge thing, not that people trying to link GG with QAnon was a huge thing. Anyway,
Right.
I
No. Yeah.
also
Yeah. Yeah.
wanted to briefly ask you, and you could just go over this you don't have to go like super in deep.
Yeah.
Were you involved with Occupy Wall Street?
Very, very, very smallly. I wasn't in New York City. Um, I did some of it in some volunteer things, a little bit of protests, mostly writing. I didn't get harassed at least, but a little. I know more people who were much more active than I was, obviously. I've had a health problem since forever. But yes, I do know people who were more involved, and I was a little in the volunteering.
Okay.